Hi guys, my name is Corey Norton, and this is my, I think, fourth speech for my Speech 205 class for Aiken Technical College. This is the informative speech. As you can see, I have a PowerPoint here to kind of go along with it. So you'll see me actually going and manually moving it. I'm not fancy, I don't have one of those nice clickers or anything. So we're just going to jump right in. Today, my topic that I'm going to talk about is obesity, and it's going to be the who, the what, the why, the when, the where, and the how. Now you may be asking, how are we going to, put all those things together? But you'll see in a few short moments. So first, we're going to start with the who, and for me, we're going to ask who is ultimately responsible for obesity. So as I think, and what I think is that individuals are actually constantly bombarded through our media with these images of individuals, whether they be celebrities or just, good-looking people, talking and eating these nice fast food hamburgers and oh, they're so good. And we are constantly bombarded by this every day. I mean, even in a 30-minute show, you could have 30, Parties commercials or McDonald's commercials or anything to that end. And if we go out into our community, we're just surrounded by these fast food restaurants. I mean, you walking down any street in any community, you're very well likely to run into a McDonald's or a KFC, a Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. I mean, you name it, you can probably run into it. And it's up to us to make the decision, where should we go eat, and base it off of what's going to be best for me, or what may be best for my family, or things to that end. So in addition to the environment that we live in, we also have to think about the advance of technology, especially that of personal technology. And by what I mean by personal technology is like games, smartphones, televisions, anything that you can do by yourself. I think of like playing a Xbox or playing on your smartphone, playing Candy Crush. I know I'm guilty of that. So if we look at how technology has grown, even over the past 5 to 10 years, 5 to 10 years ago, we had little Nokia candy bar phones and little Razor phones that the best game you could play was probably Snake, but, that's neither here nor there. But now we look at, I have an iPhone 7, somebody else may have the new Galaxy. I mean, these things are connected to the internet and can do just the unthinkable, which in some situations is wonderful. It's a great reference, it's a great this, that, and the other. But it's ultimately creating an environment that it's becoming more lazy, I guess is a good word, or sedentary. So in this graph that I'm showing here, this graph is a plot of the number of hours spent per week watching television versus relative risk for both obesity and type 2 diabetes. Now, relative risk, what that is just when you hear things along the line of someone, such and such individual or such population is twice as likely to experience yada yada. That's what relative risk is. So you can see you have it. The scale is on by halves. So if you look at, let's just look at obesity, because we'll get to type 2 diabetes later on. The relative risk for someone watching 0 to 1 hour, so pretty much no TV during the week. This is over a course of a whole week, not a day. The relative risk for them getting obesity is 1, so they're just as likely to get obesity as that's just kind of, it's going to happen regardless. So now, and if you look at the graph, you can see a kind of a trend as the more hours that you watch TV, the higher the risk is that you can get obesity. So if you look at based on this study, if someone watches more than 40 hours of TV a week, they are twice as likely, according to this chart, or a graph, to become obese relative to someone who watches 0 or 1 hours of TV. And the same thing can be said with diabetes. It's along the same pattern. So that is who is ultimately responsible. I believe it's us as individuals who are ultimately responsible, because at the end of the day, what it comes down to is you are still in control of the 18 inches between your hand and your mouth. You ultimately control what you put in your mouth and what you consume. So that's who is ultimately responsible for this obesity epidemic. And like there are other factors that go along with that, but that's that's a story for another day. So we're going to move into what is obesity. So obesity is defined as a body mass index of greater than or equal to 30 kilograms per meter squared, which is the unit of measure for BMI, or it's an unhealthy accumulation of body fat, and that's from Tabor's medical dictionary. So this body fat can manifest itself in two ways. There is what's called subcutaneous fat. So if we take the first three letters, subcutaneous, it's SUB, and subcutaneous is the fat you can see, so you can see where I'm going with that. So subcutaneous fat is the fat you can see. So you'll hear people talking about beer bellies or muffin tops. This is the same fat. And this isn't as harmful as what I'm about to talk about as in visceral fat. Visceral means organs or internal organs. So visceral fat around the organs. So now a little bit is actually encouraged and is actually fine because that's what provides cushioning and shock absorption from the outside environment, from like you bumping into someone else, or if let's just say you accidentally trip and fall and you hit the ground, that fat around those organs actually provide a cushion to those organs, especially around your stomach, your heart, and your lungs. So the problem therein becomes is when you have excess visceral fat, it increases your risk for chronic diseases. And we'll get to that on the next slide, but I was just, while we're here, this picture right here, if you've had any kind of nutrition class in the past 10 years, you've probably either seen this picture or heard of these people. This is actually a picture of the Pima Indians, P-I-M-A. They are a native tribe to both the southwestern region. So you're thinking South Texas, South Arizona, South New Mexico, and actually they have tribes in Mexico. So a quick little fun fact about these people is that they've lived in that area for a long time before the United States was ever, a thing. Now, what has happened is if we compare the tribes that live in Mexico to the tribes that live in the United States, the tribes that live in Mexico are leaner. They're still hunter-gatherers and subsistence farmers, so they're a lot more leaner. There's not a high incidence of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. Now, if we go to the ones on the other side of the border, the American Pima Indians, we have, this right here. This is, a young child at a McDonald's. This is part of, these are the same people. They have the same genetics, but it's the environment they live in. And like I said, we'll get to that, the environment in a little bit, but I wanted to point that out because I think it's interesting. And this is where we talk about the visceral fat, which is located deep, in around the organs, and it can raise the risk of chronic disease, like I said, hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. This slide was actually taken from one of my professors at UGA, Dr. De La Serre, who's a wonderful professor, by the way. All right, so let's move into the why. So why is obesity so bad? So let's start with the story. If we think back to some of these old Greek tales, we have the story of the Trojan War and the city of Troy. So in short, and I'm going to kind of chop it up, the Greeks are fighting against, the Trojans, and they're trying to, they end up surrendering, and they leave this present, which is a large wooden horse, and they sail off away from the city of Troy. And what happens is the Trojans roll this in, and celebrating victory, and when they do that, the Greeks will, there's actually a group of Greeks inside there, and what happens is they, and under the cover of night, they reopen the gates and let the Greek army who has sailed back in under the cover of night to come back in and destroy the city of Troy. Now, so how does that relate to obesity in any way? Well, let's just do it look at it this way. Let's run through an example. So, and let's just start with an obese individual who lives a lifestyle kind of like this guy right here. Got a hamburger in one hand and a Coke in the other. So let's just say he continues this lifestyle and doesn't moderate it at all. So now we're going to start moving into what's known as insulin resistance. This insulin resistance is part of, a high level of blood sugar constantly that causes this high level of insulin. And the fact that over a course or a long period of time, if the body has so much insulin all the time, then you're going to start becoming resistant to that insulin because it's just so much. So now, actually, this insulin resistance is actually a precursor to type 2 diabetes. This elevated blood sugar and this insulin resistance actually plays hand in hand to this type 2 diabetes. The the etiologies of the diseases are very similar and one leads to the other. So if we're going further down the rabbit hole, this individual is now, type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance are mainly along the lines of sugar and high sugar intake. Chronic low-grade inflammation happens when we have high fatty intake. The body sees fat as a pathology or a disease. So it sends out cytokines and different inflammatory processes to mitigate these things. But since we have a large amount of fat in our bloodstream constantly, this low-grade inflammation is chronic and goes over a long period of time. So now we're going to move into this individual has atherosclerosis, which is a high amount of fat plus this chronic low-grade inflammation, which actually kind of narrows out the blood vessels. This atherosclerosis is like the fatty plaques that you see in people's, you hear about it in people's arteries and things like that. It's just large fatty deposits. So let's just keep going. Now this is all unmanaged. So now that we have this atherosclerosis, the next step is this hypertension, because now you have narrowing of these blood vessels and all these type 2 diabetes, and there's different things floating around making it harder for the heart to work. So it has to work harder to achieve the same output. Therein lies your hypertension or high blood pressure. So now if we keep moving on down, what ends up happening with all of these comorbidities is that you set yourself up for what I like to call the lethal stew. With all of these things put together, you have a very, very bad situation that leads you to things like a stroke. You can see that there's a blockage here, or it could rupture due to the high blood pressure. Like I said, ruptures are mainly due to your high blood pressure, and blockage you can actually see in this picture. It can be caused by a blood clot here, or even fatty plaques that build up in your brain. And actually the problem is that these same conditions can be seen in your heart. So these things can set you up for both a stroke, a hemorrhagic stroke, or they can set you up for myocardial infarction or a heart attack. So now we're moving into the when. This is, when does obesity become a problem? So like we just said, obesity becomes a problem when we just have all of these comorbidities plaguing the body. And, it all just stems from, it's just because we're, a little heavier and it's okay. That may be in another part of it is socially we've gotten to, it's okay to be fat, or it's okay to be this, that, and the other. No, it's not. It's really not. It's been shown that a 5% weight loss can increase or decrease your likelihood of gaining metabolic syndrome, which is another, it kind of goes along with this, and it's a different thing. So, one of my last points is going to be where. We're going to look at the obesogenic environment. So like I mentioned before, is that we have this problem of going down in your communities, and there's just fast food restaurants everywhere. And the good thing is, it's all great. They're cheap, they're readily available, they're quick, which that's great in certain situations, but not all the time, which is a lot of Americans, that's a problem. So if we look, this number here, believe it or not, is the actual number of fast food restaurants in the United States, 160,000, and that's probably constantly growing. One of the largest contributors actually is Subway. Subway outnumbers McDonald's 2-1. But you almost see a McDonald's on every corner. That's just kind of how it is. They're more visible, I would say. So you got to think there's 160,000 restaurants over the course of the United States, and that number could vary depending on what people think of as a fast food restaurant. So that's one problem of our obesogenic environment, is just the density of these fast food restaurants. So another thing we have to look at is actually portion size. What we're looking at here on this slide is 3 examples of common restaurant entrees and their actual serving size of what they need or what they should be. So up here in the corner we have a Panera sandwich. The whole sandwich is 14 ounces, have 700 calories, whereas the USDA recommends a 5-ounce sandwich with 250 calories. So you can see the difference. Let's look at this ribeye steak, and I'm a sucker for steak. This steak that you get at Outback, you can get 11-ounce ribeye, which has about 1,200 calories. If we look at the USDA, actually recommends for one meal 3 ounces and 330 calories. So, and you can look. It's everywhere. There's just these 3 examples. Just everywhere. So what you're actually given, and let's just use the steak as an example, what they're actually given versus what is actually recommended is 4 times the difference. You're getting 4 times what you need. So, just keep that in mind when you go to these places, that you're actually getting a lot more than a serving size, even though they may tell you or lead you different. The last problem with the obesogenic environment is actually portion control. If we look at this is all portion distortion. It's something you can search. I think it's on the American Heart Association website. Let's see, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. You can look this up. It's actually really great. It shows you how this is just a portion of a hamburger, fries, kind of what you would expect on a hamburger. And this is the actual portion of what it should be. So almost half of all this. And so that kind of plays into what we had before, but there's some other fun facts that I found on that website. There's actually a presentation called portion distortion, and one of the things that it has is that 20 years ago, the average size of a bagel was 3 inches. The average size of a bagel today is 6 inches. So you got to think it's double the size, and it's actually almost double the calories. The 6-inch bagel contains 350, whereas the 3-inch one contains only 140. And there's different things like that. An average cheeseburger, much like the one on this plate, 20 years ago, contained 333 calories. The one today contains anywhere between 600 to 900 calories, depending on what restaurant you go to. So you got to look at the environment as being part of our problem, to the density, the portion control, and actually the increase in portion sizes. So that's a big problem. And so to wrap it up, it says, how do we fix all of this? Well, this isn't something that you can just attack head on, because this is a multifaceted problem. So what we have to do to combat this epidemic is we have to attack it on both fronts that I've kind of explained in this presentation. We have to attack both the food problem, all the food problems we've labeled, and this sedentary lifestyle that we have now just become distraught and overrun by. If we can limit these two things and just change them as become more of an active person, anywhere between 60 to 150 minutes a week is actually baseline and actually encouraged. Choosing better choices for food. Now I know there's certain situations where you have to have a burger. I mean, we're all human. We all busy. That just happens. But we need to scale it back to we're eating a burger maybe once a week, and every other day, not every other day. That just high fat intake, it's slowly killing us. It really is. So that's how we should combat this epidemic. And to wrap it all up, the obesity epidemic that is just plaguing America and actually the world comes down to us as individuals to start a grassroots movement and to fix all of these problems that I've talked about and to make better choices. So that's obesity: the who, the what, the why, the when, the where, and the how.